Hello everyone. Welcome to the Alice Mackay Room at the Vancouver Public Library. Thank you for joining us on such a sunny and beautiful day. You resisted the allure of the Canucks, of the Whitecaps. I think there's a concert at the CUNY, and the sun. So you're here. Congratulations. Thank you for being here. It's wonderful to see so many of you here, and for the second Incite of the year. So I'm very grateful for the Vancouver Writers Festival for this partnership, which brings the most exciting writers right here to your library. So before we begin, I want to remind us that we're hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I want to share that I'm an immigrant from Mexico, which means I feel a particular responsibility to continually learn about the ongoing effects of colonialism in this part of the world and to bring that awareness into my work as a public servant. And that means taking a curatorial approach so that we center Indigenous voices on our stages so that these stages help advance reconciliation. And on that note, I'm excited to let you know that the 2025 Indigenous Storyteller in Residence is Chris Bose, and we have a spring full of very exciting programming with him. So check out our website. There's a poster over there. He's doing incredible work. And also, I want to remind you that June is National Indigenous History Month. And so we have a lot of Indigenous themed programs coming up, like author events, film screenings. We even have a concert on the rooftop. Yeah. So check that out as well on our website. We have a few posters there for our programming. If you've never been to a VPL program, especially an arts and culture program that my team does, we do about 100 events a year. And that's a range of like everything from contemporary dance to theater to author events, all kinds of stuff. Let's get into housekeeping notes and get this started. So a quick show of hands, who has never been to an Incite before? Okay, great, welcome. Who's been to many Incites before? Awesome, great. So it's always good to know who's in the room. Before I pass it on to Leslie, for those of you who've never been to this room, a couple of notes. There's a couple of doors to go in and out of the room, but I'm gonna ask you that you please, if you need to leave or enter at any point, use the one in the back, because that one is less disruptive to folks on stage. This one kind of feels like you're walking right on stage if you're on stage. So use the one in the back. You can leave and enter as many times as you want. We're not the ballet or the Queen Elizabeth Theatre. Also, very important, your cell phones. Please take a second right now to silence it. They can be very distracting to folks on stage, but also to your fellow patrons. So make sure you're not making noise with your phone. However, you're welcome to take a picture or a quick video of the event. We love it when you post it online and tell the world that you're at a cool library event. So please tag us, tag the Writers Fest. And now, it's my pleasure to pass the torch to Leslie Herdig, who is the Artistic Director of the Vancouver Writers Fest.
Thank you, Jorge, and hello to all of you here tonight, and hi to everyone watching from home as well. We are very pleased to be here to celebrate the launch of Garth Mullins' new book, Crackdown, Surviving and Resisting the War on Drugs. It's a topic that cannot be avoided in this city, a city that has the wealth and the geography to be a true paradise, but has broken down and suffers from, well, we don't take care of the people who live here, to be quite honest. We're honored to have Garth here tonight, and as the Tyee wrote a few days ago, Crackdown is part memoir, part manifesto, and does an impressive job of laying out the complexity of the toxic drug crisis, the ways that existing programs support and punish people who use drugs, and the nuance that is required in a government response. We are grateful as ever to the Vancouver Public Library for their collaboration and for providing this space in which for us to gather. Also, we're grateful to our government sponsors, the City of Vancouver, the Government of British Columbia, the Government of Canada, for providing us with support to put on the programs that we do, and to our title sponsor, CMHC Granville Island, for giving us a place to do the work that we do for most of the year. For those of you who are new to Incite and to the Vancouver Writers Fest, this series is now on quarterly, running each season throughout the year, and we hope we will see you again in late June when we're presenting the shortlist for the BC and Yukon book prizes, which will be a fun event, always is. Stay tuned for details on that one. You'll find more information on our website and on the VPL website soon. The Vancouver Writers Fest is also hosting multiple events over the next month, including our Spring Poetry Bash on April the 29th at the Review Stage on Granville Island, and on May 8th, an event with Booker Prize shortlisted author Madeleine Tien with her gorgeous new novel, The Book of Records. And tickets for both of those events can be found on our website, so please check those out as well. Just a note on the shape of the event here tonight, Andrea and Garth are going to speak for the next 50 minutes or so before turning it over to you, our audience members, for questions of your own. You'll notice that we have a QR code that you can scan to ask questions if you'd like to enter your question that way digitally. If you don't have a smartphone or you're not comfortable with technology, you can just put your hand up and Andrea will get to as many questions as possible that way as well. And for those of you watching at home, we hope you'll ask questions too, and we will receive those. Andrea will have an iPad in her lap that those will show up on, so we'll get to as many as possible. Following the event, Garth is able to sign copies of Crackdown, courtesy of our official bookseller, Black Bond Book Warehouse. We hope you'll stop by and say hi to Marianne over here and pick up a few copies of Garth's book. Now I'm pleased to welcome our guest this evening. Andrea Wu is a journalist with the Globe and Mail who reports extensively on health, including substance use and the toxic drug crisis. Garth Mullins is a harm reduction activist, award-winning journalist, writer, broadcaster, musician, and new father. He is an organizer with the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users and executive producer and host of the award-winning podcast Crackdown. Please welcome Garth and Andrea.
I'm a little shocked, actually. Lots happened recently.
Yeah. Congratulations on the baby and the book. A lot of births happening here.
Thank you.
The book is amazing. What compelled you to write a memoir?
You know, I was actually late to reading. Like, I didn't read a book, you know, a novel until I was 16. I have bad eyesight, so it was a struggle. You know, I have to use a very thick magnifying glass, and it was so much work that it seemed like books were for other people. and I thought people smarter than me. I also was a bad speller. I still am a bad speller, but it doesn't matter anymore because a computer can do it. So I didn't think that I would be writing a book. I thought that, when I was young, that books were for other people. When Penguin Random House approached me, I thought about it, and my partner Elisa said, yes, you will write a book. And she says, if someone's offering you money to write, you always say yes. Lisa is very wise. It was 2022, January, it was winter, I was watching TV, and all of these truckers were, or people who said they were truckers were going to Ottawa and were occupying the parliamentary precinct. And I had been starting to frame out the book, and it was more, a little more journalistic, a little bit more citations and quotations, and then I realized these people in Ottawa are incredibly well organized. They had police posing for pictures with them. They had people ferrying jerry cans of diesel. And they were saying that it was about the pandemic, but you could see that they were really targeting marginalized groups of people like trans kids, like immigrants. This was a far-right mobilization there in Ottawa, and it was incredibly well organized. And I thought, oh my God, it's only a matter of time before they find us. And I realized that memoir is a more popular form of writing that will get to more people. And we had to get our ideas out as far as possible so that anybody could read the book, so you don't have to be a policy wonk or something. And so I changed course. I went for a memoir. And lastly, I showed a chapter of the book to my friend Jeff Loudon. He's been my best friend for 35 years, and there's lots of him in the book. And he looked at my chapter, with all the notes and the footnotes and the citations, and he says, "This is really interesting, but Garth, man, it reads like an encyclopedia." And I said, "Oh," and he said, "No, it's okay. It's just not you." And so Jeff always is truthful to me, and I took that seriously. And I went for a memoir.
I think many people in this room will know that you host Crackdown, which is a podcast, very well researched, the drug war as covered by drug users, won many awards. And while you host it and you feature in it, you often center other people, other drug users, their family members. You have researchers, doctors on. You craft episodes around issues, whereas this memoir, while it's of the same name and the same themes, this is decidedly very personal. You are incredibly vulnerable in this book. And I'm wondering what that writing process was like for you and how it's different from crafting an episode of the podcast.
I mean, the podcast in some ways is easier because it's only about me a little bit. I share enough so that the guests on the show don't feel like I'm trying to be a neutral, objective journalist. And no offense, objective journalists are great. We need lots more. But I just, I want to bring on other people and share their experiences. But I also felt like the guests that we have on the show, and we've been doing it for 6 years now, we're past 50 episodes, they're so sharing with us. They're so vulnerable, and they reach a hand out through the microphone into the ether, and they reach that hand to all of our listeners, especially listeners who use drugs, and they let people feel less alone in that vulnerability. I've had so many people write in and said, "Oh, that person's story is my story too." And I thought, well, I should put my money where my mouth is. I shouldn't just rely on other people to do the heavy emotional lifting of telling their story. That I should tell my own. the decision to do the memoir is a little departure from Crackdown, because we do use a lot of academic sourcing in Crackdown. In fact, one of our intellectual directors is here tonight, Tommy, or Thomas Kerr, I believe is your professional name. Anyways, he's here somewhere. Thomas Kerr has published so many papers that they would probably stack up higher than the library on drug policy. He's been a research partner with the Vancouver area network of drug users since forever, decades. And he helps bring a kind of rigor. He and a few other people like Jade Boyd, Ryan McNeil, and a few others help Danya Fast. They help us relate the stories of people who are surviving the drug war, but then show research, right? Because I've always felt like people who use drugs were vilified, were criminalized, were thought of with suspicion, and I can even feel sometimes when I'm in a room and explaining something that people are like, okay, sure, what's the scam here? And so we also bolster the personal stories of people with the research, because they're so often going in the same direction and telling the same thing. And so that's one of the strengths of the podcast. And I had thought about doing it with the book, but it just wound up doing my own story. And the book is fact-checked and well-researched, and I had it independently fact-checked, because I am still very paranoid about people thinking that I'm full of BS or whatever. I know also, if you're an activist and an organizer, particularly on the left, you will get, you got to be bulletproof. You got to come with your facts correct. And as a journalist, I've always practiced that too. If you get a platform, you better do your research. So we did do a lot of fact-checking, as we do on the podcast. I just didn't, fill the book up with notations and citations. But the two really go together. We named it the same thing because we hoped that if people listened to the podcast, they'd pick up the book. And if people liked the book, they'd listen to the podcast. Because we have to keep doing it. We started the podcast in 2019. We started meeting and getting together the people who would become the core of the podcast in 2017. And that's an editorial board of people from groups like the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, the BC Association of People on Methadone, Western Aboriginal Harm Reduction Society, groups that represented different marginalized people that are hit in different ways from the drug war. We got an editorial board of those people who are my colleagues, my comrades, my friends, and we perfected kind of a form of movement journalism where we'd be speaking from the movement, not just from one person's ideas, but from a collective, from a tradition of that. And I think that's the strength. And the writing was a little bit about that, like that too. The writing of the book, I did work with other people, making sure I had our stories right, making sure I remembered things the right way, and making sure that the copy that you got in your hands would be something you could trust, that we got everything right.
One of the things that you wrote about with a lot of vulnerability is your albinism. In what ways did it shape your identity?
I mean, I was so ashamed to have albinism. This is the condition where you have no pigment in the skin, hair, or eyes, legal blindness. So, by the way, if I ever walk past any of you in the street and you smile at me and I seem to be like, I don't react, it's not because I'm like a big author now and I don't care about the little, it's because I actually can't see you. So, I was born with albinism, and as soon as I became, going to school and stuff like that, I was really ashamed of it. I eventually, when I was a teenager, I encountered punk rock, and I found this subculture full of these skinny, pale people with dyed hair, and I thought, oh, that's for me right in there, right? So I could kind of camouflage my own outsiderness. But it's always been with shame. I always felt very ashamed of it. And I never really met other people with albinism because it's so rare. It's about 1 in every 20,000 people in North America have it. So I just didn't meet anybody until Lisa and I pitched a documentary to CBC on albinism, and there's some terrible crimes against people with albinism happening around the world. People's body parts get sold to other rich people under the mistaken belief that it brings good luck, and a lot of the sort of magical thinking around people with albinism gets softly permeated through TV and film, made in Hollywood and in North America. So we did a documentary on this, and it took me to a conference where I met loads of people with albinism, some of them fighting against the discrimination and violence, and they were doing it very proudly. And I thought, I have no business being ashamed or trying to hide who I am. And I was inspired by the activism that I saw there. Lisa and I were recording the documentary. She walks into the ballroom, when you have a conference, there's a big ballroom, and she's like, she can always find the 6'4" albino dude in the crowd. She can always find me from a mile away, but all of a sudden, we all look like that. So she had a hard job finding me. But I started to unlock that part of the shame, but that's been the big response. And like I said earlier, it sort of made academia, writing, reading, all of that stuff was a big barrier to me because it was so visual. And I was going to school at a time when large print and easy pinch zoom on the monitor to bring up the text size just wasn't around. So yeah, it was quite a barrier.
You mentioned your activism. You got into political causes very early on. Why is that?
I guess because I think I wanted to fight back better on behalf of myself, but I was too ashamed to. So I just picked up on the causes of other people who were getting the shitty end of the stick, just other underdog causes. And then when I was, quite young, just 12 or 13, I started finding out about nuclear weapons that were all ready to blow each other up. Anything could happen. I was a teenager at the end of the Cold War, and there was Reagan and Thatcher and Mulrooney and all that, and there was so much triumphalism and propaganda around that I really reacted against that. And one of the first activist crusades I was on was I started a little peace group in my high school, and we joined up with other groups from around the city. We were opposing U.S. nuclear warships that used to come and visit the Vancouver harbor. And so we got a whole bunch of little dinghies and canoes and sailboats and stuff together, borrowed them from people's parents, and we thought we would make like a nautical picket line across Burrard Inlet and stop the warship, right? Come on, I was 14 or something like that, So, one of the dads at the school I went to, he lent us this boat. He was piloting it, but he thought this was great. This was super exciting for him, right? So we were on the boat, and out of the fog bank there, English Bay, Spanish banks, I guess, the ship emerges like it's like cinema. It's this gray Leviathan, and through the binoculars I can see sailors in their white uniforms standing by deck guns and some getting ready to salute the city as they come in and stuff. And then you see the binoculars and you turn around and you see our little, terrible little boats and Zodiacs, and someone's got a floaty thing for a pool noodle, and then my old friend Charles Boylan, who's a communist in the city going way back, late Charles Boylan, he has a little boat, but he's made it look like a pirate submarine. So he's out there too. And then of course there's the police who are out there filming us all in their boat. And I don't think the U.S. nuclear warship took any notice of us. They just plowed straight through. We were in the water, boats were going over, So we picked each other up and put each other back, and we all went back on shore, and there were TV cameras there to see what we were doing. This was quite early, 5 or 6 a.m. And I thought it was awesome. I loved it. We didn't stop them, but we all got to know each other a little bit more. We all got to talk politics as we dried out our clothes. And, I went to school in the morning for my first classes, and I heard over the PA, "Mr. Mullins to the office, please." because the morning news had gone off, already, and parents had called in to complain. And the vice principal said, "Sit down. You're going to disband your peace group and focus on your studies." And I did not do either of those things. Yeah, so that's how I got into activism. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about drug use, and specifically the first time that you ever used heroin, which you write about in the book. And I was wondering, would you feel comfortable doing a short reading from the book?
Let me give it a try.
Okay.
Let me see if I can pull this off. Like I said, new dad, so I'm a little bit tired, and it's a little challenging to read, but I'm going to give it a shot. Okay. So this is the first time I used heroin. I was about 19. I was in San Francisco, and I'll just read it to you. This is sort of about the 5th chapter into the book. Zippo and I slipped through the lobby of an old Art Deco apartment building at 750 O'Farrell Street in San Francisco's Tenderloin district. We climbed the stairs to the roof. Zippo was tall and skinny like me. We both had the same slouchy gait. But I had a squint and a spiky platinum mohawk. Zippo had a shaved head and a sneer of disapproval like some kind of an art critic. I was 19. I'd never done heroin before, probably because it had a bad rep, but tonight I didn't care. Whatever happens, happens, I thought. By the light of an old skylight pyramid, Zippo cooked up our little ball of black tar. It was as thick and sticky as Athabasca bitumen. He'd done this before. I held my lighter under the spoon, and Zippo prodded the heroin with the plunger of his syringe to nudge it from solid into liquid. The smell of butane and burning spoon curled around us. I tore off a little chunk of cigarette filter and put it in the spoon. We each drew up 30 units through that cotton into our own syringe. I pushed up the sleeve of my biker jacket for a tourniquet. A big vein at the inside of my left elbow jumped out to meet me, as fat as the E string on a bass guitar. It vibrated in readiness under my index finger. I took a breath and thought of the Vietnam vet who lived on Van Ness Avenue. He used to say, "Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast." I repeated the phrase to myself, and in the low light, I slid the needle into my vein and pushed down the plunger. It felt like sunshine in my veins, coming over me in warm waves. The muscles in my back and my jaw relaxed. Even in the cold marine night air, I felt cozy, like a blanket had been wrapped around me. I wasn't getting wrecked. I was getting whole. I wasn't getting high. I was passing through a golden gate to a calm, protected place. Heroin was forgiveness. It was love. All the pain and tension melted away. That background howling of self-disgust was suddenly silenced. Nothing and no one could touch me here. For years, it had felt like I had only two choices. I could give up and accept that I was some kind of congenital fuck-up, flawed from birth. Or I could struggle to overcome who I was and become someone else. Now, I saw a whole new path. I could just accept myself. On heroin, I didn't feel ugly. I didn't feel stupid. I didn't feel unlovable. I felt like nothing at all. I watched the reptile ghost boy that I was get up and walk out into the tundra's warm midnight sun of Yellowknife where I grew up. This was the purest kind of relief I'd ever known. This must be what everybody else feels like all the time, I thought. This must be normal. The search was over. For me, heroin wasn't self-destruction, it was salvation. In the glow of his cigarette cherry, Zippo's scowl eased. We were like the soft foil pack of Camel cigarettes in my pocket, smooth, combustible, easily crushed. Far away, cars drove empty streets and a dog barked. Somewhere out on San Francisco Bay, a ship's horn sounded a long, lonely moan. Zippo and I leaned back under the dilated night sky. Our eyelids at half-mast let in the weak light from long dead stars. If I let go of this tarry roof, I could fall into the black forever and be gone if I just let go. In a deep nod, I struggled momentarily to breathe, letting out a little piggy snort that started us both. We laughed. How long had we been there? The street was quiet now. It was somewhere between too late and too early, the wolf's tale of civil twilight. I could feel the reverie already starting to fade, but I knew I'd be back for more. After that night on the roof, Zippo and I grew close. He was my roommate, confidant, and business partner. We had each other's six. Sometimes we traveled together. We were part of a small community of teenage punks and street kids who ranged up and down the West Coast. Everyone had a nickname: Jezebel, Nuck Nuck, Knox, Dusty, Double D, TJ, Trash Girl, Fraggle, Zero. And like every other city I've lived in, there was somebody called Baby, somebody called Animal, and somebody called Mama Bear. We were living through the supposed end of history. Capitalism had been beaten by the Soviets. All the important battles were over, and we were supposed to be happy about it. It was the era between 1960s Summer of Love San Francisco and the tech bro dystopia that characterized the city in the 2000s. In this interregnum, hella morbid symptoms appeared. Thanks.
What does it feel like revisiting that?
Well, I think a few days ago, I might have been like, well, I sure wish they had that old school heroin here in that city. And I do wish that for everybody who needs it, right? Like, that was the closest thing to the poppy that you used to get that wasn't just smoking opium. Black tar heroin, been around for a long time. And we don't have heroin in Vancouver anymore. It's all been replaced with fentanyl. Police in North America, were trying to stamp out the scourge of heroin. And every time you hear politicians talk about stamping out the scourge of something, it doesn't just leave us with nothing. It doesn't just mean there's no drugs. Something comes in. And what usually comes in is something stronger. So now that Trump is going to stamp out fentanyl or whatever, or have our local fentanyl czar, which I'm still available for that job if they want to. If they want to do that, they're not going to just have nothing. They're not going to go back to heroin. They're going to have things that are worse. So I guess, what does that make me feel? It's sort of like a genteel time, like when that wasn't like Russian roulette. And I know that may sound strange that shooting heroin wasn't like Russian roulette. This was 1990 or so when that happened, right? This was the first wave of HIV, and needles were hard to get. So sometimes me and that guy Zippo, we had to share a syringe between us. I didn't even know that little piece of cigarette filter that we were both using, we had our own rigs, our own syringes that night on the roof, but we could have been transferring virus back and forth between that. I didn't know that. At the time, when I was in high school, we had a premier called Bill Vanderzam, and he was against HIV education for students. So people aided and abetted my ignorance. And so I was also kind of naive at that time. The school I went to, they just had a guest speaker come in. It was like, drugs are bad, don't do drugs. And then when I had smoked weed, I was just like, well, this doesn't seem so scary to me. And then I didn't know. I thought maybe all drugs are just as benign as weed. I got bad information. So I was kind of naive on the rooftop. But also the feeling of relief was dramatic because I was a suicidal kid. And it may sound really counterintuitive, but I'm grateful to the heroin that I found on that rooftop because I'm not entirely sure I would be here if not for that. It's a funny thing to say heroin saved your life, but maybe it did for me. Maybe it did for a lot of people I know. Because if you couldn't find a little respite, a little salvation from the howling alienation and self-hate, maybe you wouldn't have made it. Maybe you needed that vacation to get through. And I'm very glad I did.
To that point, when I interview people for stories, and I often ask why they started using drugs or what it did for them or how it made them feel, repeatedly you hear people describe heroin like a warm hug. Like for a little while, everything is okay, and you feel comfortable and at peace despite whatever horrific trauma or circumstances you were living through. And I thought that description of using in your book was very powerful because it adds context as to the why. Whereas, we're so quick to judge and, and say, you should just stop, or why did you start? This is a choice. But when people are living through unimaginable circumstances, it makes a lot more sense.
Thanks.
Dr. Gabor Mate, a friend of the Writers' Fest, he says that all addiction is rooted in some sort of childhood trauma. Do you agree with that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure I even know what addiction is. It's this concept that you try and look it up in the medical textbook, they'll call it opioid use disorder or something. It's so fraught. I agree that lots of us had some kind of adverse childhood experiences. I like, I write about it in the book a little bit like that, my folks are career people. They worked hard. They work a lot of hours. I'm from a family of hard workers, going back generations. We've always worked hard. And me and my sister were in the care of somebody who should not be taking care of children. And I think that was one of the things that, was that I was seeking relief from. And the albinism was a big part of it too. Those two things got mixed together because those kind of predator type people, they look at kids who are alienated. They look at kids with disabilities with a targeting eye. So I think that does set you up for the possibility of finding relief from drugs. But I don't know that explains all of it in my case. Like I can't be sure, and so I don't know that I could agree with the sentence that all addiction is rooted in childhood abuse or something like that. Like addiction's so complicated. I don't even use the word very much. It's like you get wired, you get a habit, you get, everybody's is a little bit different. They do different things, but I think what you can see, what I try to explain about my own situation, is it wasn't just some wild thing. It was serving a rational purpose, and I know that sounds counterintuitive, but that's what it was doing at the time. And then, of course, when you do find that relief, of course, you're going to go back. You're going to go back again and again and again. You'll want to live there. And it's illegal, so you're going to have run-ins with the law. It's expensive, so you're going to be broke. And because it's illegal, there's no one looking out for the potency or the ingredients, so you can have overdoses. That's why we have so many people dying of overdose, because the drugs are illegal, and that means it's a wild west out there. There's no rules. We have rules around booze. How old you have to be, how strong the booze can be, where it can be sold, the hours of operation. We don't have any rules around hard drugs, right? I mean, we would say, it being against the law is the rule, but it's meaningless rule. It is impossible to make any space drug-free, really, like by sheer force of cops. Even prisons are not drug-free. You can get heroin in most lockups in this country, or opioids, I should say. So yeah, it's hard to say how you get there, but I think it's complicated, right? And I think people have been studying what is addiction, how does it all work for well over a century, and I think we can see some themes. I think adverse childhood experiences. We can see trauma is definitely a big part of it. You can see that particularly the trauma of residential school and the 60s scoop. Like my friend Jeff Loudon, he's Anishinaabe from Curve Lake, and he was scooped from his mother, kidnapped from his mother when he was 8 months old. So when he feels the warm hug, the mother's hug of heroin, it's literally because he was denied his own mother's actual hug. And I wasn't. My parents have stood by me all the way through it. They're here tonight. They're not embarrassed of me. They're proud of me. And Jeff never got that. In fact, Jeff didn't know about the 60s scoop because they didn't teach that in school when we went to school either, when me and Jeff went to school. We're Generation X, so the curriculum on Indigenous people was pretty bad. And so Jeff said to me when we were talking about it, he said, "Oh, my mom just threw away the kids." And so he felt rejected from the very beginning. And, we looked up on the phone together, we looked up what is the 60s scoop, and we read it out, and it was news to him. And I said, "I don't think your mom threw you away. I think you were stolen, buddy. I think you were stolen by the government." And I can't imagine that kind of initial wound. There's no childhood experience that I have that's anything close to that. So yeah, when you have things like that, for sure you're going to be looking for relief. But also, we've created a world that is so nasty, that's so futureless right now. Fascism is just south of us. There are far-right people who are okay with all of that stuff, with soft connections to fascism, running in the election campaign that's on now. It's in Italy, in France, all over the world, we see fascism rising up. We see climate change catastrophe coming. And when people ask me, "Oh, why'd you do drugs?" I say, "Fuck, man, why don't you do drugs?" This is the end of this is the apocalypse. Come on, get high. But I mean, I do have a serious answer for the apocalypse, by the way, but it's not just get high. But I think those structural forces that are around us, not just in our childhood, but the brutality of racism, the grinding alienation of jobs, like poverty, all these things set people up for, the possible salvation and refuge in heroin like I found it. And we're living in a society where there's so little connection, where we're all cut off from each other, and that loneliness and alienation is brutal. People are so starved for community that they'll want to go to a rally put on by the richest guy in the world and his president down in the States. So we have to fight against that, that starvation of connection that we have right now too. I don't even remember what the question was.
Neither do I. I wanted to turn to drug policy, and specifically progress and backlash in this province. For all of its missteps, BC has been the one province that has tried some of the boldest responses that we've seen so far to the drug crisis. There was an effort to decriminalize personal possession, which was then sort of walked back. It's not completely killed, but it's effectively restricted to your personal home now. We tried prescribed alternatives, which is commonly called safer supply. So this is the prescription of a regulated substance to replace whatever street drug you might be using. at the most, like 4,000 something people had access to it in the province. And now that's also being walked back a little bit, that you will need to have a healthcare provider witness you using it. You can't just take it home like other medications. What do you make of everything that has happened in the last few years in terms of drug policy here?
I mean, BC is the place where the methadone program got started in the 60s, where Dr. Holliday set up a clinic, and he realized if you get people on methadone, you don't rush them off in a week. Their lives stabilize. They get jobs, relationships, everything starts to sort out. It was a great revelation. But of course, when he set up his clinic, he set it up in Kitsilano, and the neighbors protested, and they said, oh, this will be unsafe, and we got to get this guy out of here, and our property values will go down. And that was in the 60s, right? So some things never change. But BC has always been this place where a lot of these things get tried out, and the rest of the world often picks up on a lot of them. We've had many firsts here. Often, people will use civil disobedience to try and accelerate the process. Like the first safe injection site here, the first permitted one was Incite. And I know there's, is it Colleen? Where are you? Incite worker here. Oh, well, hi back there. Thank you for your work. And the lives of my friends that you have saved in your work. I'm sorry, I'm sure I got your name wrong. And I think a lot of the firsts, like Incite, happened because people broke the law and set up unsanctioned civil disobedience incites first. So people like Ann Livingston, didn't wait for permission. She and a bunch of other organizers just opened it up, and got a storefront and did the thing. The first syringes I was ever given were not from a needle exchange. They were from a volunteer with a backpack who had obtained them illegally and was distributing them to try and save lives. We had that in BC. And those policies that you mentioned, decriminalization and alternative prescribing, they were, a government in the political center, in the middle, the NDP here. And I was invited to be part of making both of those things. I sat with other people from other groups and government officials, and we fought over the details, but I was invited into the rooms. Not anymore. I met all the ministers of mental health and addictions and all that, but not the new one. And what's changed is the right-wing backlash, because all of these things were happening, and we were just following the science and trying to do the best thing. And then Pierre Poilievre came out here, and he filmed a video down at Crab Park. And he used people living in tents as like a set. He didn't go talk to them. He just used them as a backdrop. And he said, everything feels broken. People are dying because of woke, liberal government dope flooding the streets. And this is bullshit. He knows it's bullshit. People are not dying from prescribed alternatives like Dilaudid. The coroner tells us this. We know this. People are dying from street fentanyl, not from something that's prescribed. People are dying from the thing where there's no rules, like I was telling you earlier. But Pierre Poilievre came out here and he basically started campaigning against the prescribed alternatives program, campaigning against decriminalization, telling everybody that in Canada all the dope fiends are coddled and they just get handed out whatever they want and they don't have to do anything. And it just isn't true. But it helped his political career, helped get momentum under him, stampeded and scared voters. And it was a classic piece of moral panic, like we have seen going all the way back to 1907 when, in British Columbia, another first, this is where Canada's prohibition, this is where the drug war started. In 1907, we had political leaders that were full of fear and scapegoating of immigration, particularly from Japan and China and India, and that was mainstream politics in 1907. There was a big rally down at where City Hall was back then at Main and Hastings. The crowd got whipped up. There was about 7,000 people there, which must have been at the time every white person in Vancouver showing up. And then they went on a rampage and smashed up Chinatown and went to smash up Japantown. And then There were telegraph cables flew around the world. In Ottawa, they were a little embarrassed about this. Not confronting the politics, just embarrassed of the, it's, very déclassé to smash things. And so they sent out a guy to, a senior public servant to compensate people whose windows got smashed. This guy noticed that there was, opium being produced. And he wrote back to Ottawa that he was afraid that the nefarious foreign influence of opium was falling, that white women and girls were falling under the sway of this nefarious foreign influence. And very quickly, this guy realized, I should capitalize. So he, instead of being a deputy minister anymore, he decided to run, became elected, became very quickly a minister of labor, then became Canada's longest serving prime minister, William Lyon Mackenzie King, also champion of Chinese Immigration Exclusion Act and stuff like that. So this guy realized racism and fear and prohibition worked very well together. There were moral panic articles in the newspapers of the day in Vancouver, and we periodically go through these things, and we're in one now. And so it's not only hard to fight when there's toxic drugs killing all your friends in your community, now we have toxic politics, so we can't even talk about it clearly. And so I am so glad that we have room here tonight to have this discussion that is not full of a yelling Pierre Poilievre or fake statistics or bad Trump information. And this is the reason why I go back to, in our podcast, our formulation is to rely on the academic research and really try to stick to the evidence, because we don't want to have a big yelling fake discussion that just scares people. We actually want to save people's lives and make healthy communities.
On the politics, we had a provincial election late last year, and you mentioned Pierre Poilievre. We have the federal election less than 2 weeks away. Is there anything that you've seen on the campaign trail or not seen that sticks out to you? Do you have thoughts on what is and is not being discussed?
Yeah, I'm a political nerd, so I read the throne speech and, well, not read it all. I kind of control F for stuff in the throne speech and budgets, and I watch the election every night. We order a pizza when the election, I used to go watch the returns in the Wise Club with people. And so what I noticed is that even while thousands of people were dying, we never pinged in any of these things, really. We never took up much airtime in the election. Our deaths didn't mean very much. As our deaths increased, nobody got fired. No cabinet minister was forced to resign. Bev Oda, the Tory cabinet minister, was forced to resign because she expensed a $16 glass of orange juice to the taxpayer. But you can preside over the deaths of thousands, and you don't have to step down. And believe me, I do blame the government. I blame all of them, because our deaths are not a force of nature. They're a force of policy that can be undone. The Controlled Drugs and Substances Act makes that Wild West that I was talking about, where there's no rules and people can sell anything. Nobody dies from moonshine anymore, right? Because we tried prohibition. Moonshine drinking didn't go away. The stuff got stronger. People died. People got sick. Organized crime benefited, but drinking didn't go away. So we thought that was a bad idea. So we only had prohibition for a few years for alcohol. We've had it for 115 or 118 or whatever for drugs. So, yeah, what I don't see in the election campaign is someone saying, I'm going to do something about this. We're going to change this. We're going to stop. I don't see anybody saying, I'm going to hold my cabinet ministers to account. And if we don't see those numbers falling, I'm going to consider that they're not doing their job. There's no measurable deliverables. In fact, after the election this fall, the province quietly folded the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. It seems like they're wrapping up the emergency. They're just like having a couple thousand people in British Columbia die every year is just normal, and we don't mind anymore. This is based on some ideas, I think, that the wrong people are dying. If it's just some people on the 100 block living in tents and making a nuisance of themselves, poor people dying, they're going to die anyway, their lives weren't worth very much. But this is not true. Those are bad stereotypes, but also everybody's dying. All stratums of society are dying. And if you're a drug user, you don't necessarily have to look like it. Like I had an office job, a research job where I went to work every day, and the people on the bus and the people in the cubicle farm where I went to work, they didn't know that I was on methadone. They didn't know anything about me. They didn't know any of that. I was scared that they would find out and I would get fired. I was scared that it would all come crashing down. But, I had a union, and fucking up the unions, man. They're there to protect us, and they protected me. And extended benefits also gave me access to mental health treatment. But this idea of who is a drug user and who is not it's wrong, right? If people in power understood the massive sprawling constituency, they say people like me who have a daily opioid user of some form or another, in British Columbia there's 225,000 of us. So every family, every workplace, every church or gurdwara or mosque or community center, they've got people like me in them. You just don't know. And a lot of those places also have empty chairs where people are missing. Whether it's amongst people living on the downtown east side or people going to Langara College. International students come here and they don't know. And so the Gurdwaras are spending hundreds of thousands sending people's bodies back to India because they don't know what's going on here. And so the government's not making this a key issue at election time are feeding into this problem. So that's what I've seen missed. But then somebody did bring it into the election system, and we did start to see it a lot, and it was the right. Ever since the convoy, the Ottawa convoy in 2022, we've seen the far right having more and more momentum in this country, and the far right hates harm reduction. The far right hates safe supply, hates overdose prevention sites. Pierre Poilievre calls them drug dens, and he says he's going to shut them all down if he gets elected. And that's what came to the election. That's what came to the hustings, to the campaigns, is this kind of a terrible, hateful targeting, this backlash, this moral panic. Such an old idea, this moral panic. But the government, the parties on the political center, the Liberals and the NDP, they are not standing up to champion us anymore because they're scared of the right. Because when there's a real backlash, a real moral panic, when we see the far right, like fascism, rising up in the world, it doesn't just affect the people who are its supporters and followers. It's like the planet Jupiter passing through near Earth's orbit. Its gravity drags us toward it, right? So the gravity of a mobilized far right is dragging all these other institutions, so newspapers and media outlets that are of the political center, their idea of the political center is relative, right? It's not absolute. So when the right goes more right, the center goes to the right. And political parties follow, and premiers and potential prime ministers, they get gun shy. They don't want to lose votes, because what all those guys want more than anything else, they don't want to save lives as much as they want to be elected and stay in power. So they go quiet on that stuff. And so when I was working on decriminalization and safe supply and prescribed alternatives, I used to get invited to these government meetings, and I used to get to meet with the ministers, me and other people. I'm just a policy wonk for the movement, right? So that's how I get in there. But it's a big team effort. I'm not a special genius or something. I'm just a guy who's working in this movement and seeing the importance of these things. But not anymore. They are not interested. We used to be able to lobby and push and cajole and arm twist governments in the political center. The Kennedy Stewart government of Vancouver, or the John Horgan government in Victoria, or the Justin Trudeau government. There would be you develop relationships. There was things they weren't doing it nearly enough. They were too quiet. They were too anemic. Their little efforts were half measures. But at least we could push them a little bit. We could try to get things, sometimes really revolutionary things. Like we had a very successful decriminalization program. It just wasn't explained to people at all properly, right? The point of decriminalization is to stop people from going to jail. That's it, right? There's decriminalization on its own can't stop the deaths. Decriminalization is not a replacement for missing housing in this city. It's not going to end homelessness. That's the other thing, is these small pilot projects sometimes are required to solve every social problem that's ever existed. So yeah, that's definitely something that's missing. Is you asked what's missing? Guts. Guts is what's missing. We got way too many cowards. And I'm not just talking about, we got the people on the far right. They're not cowards. They're terrifyingly gutsy right now. But the people we need to stand up and fight on our behalf are cowards for the most part. There are some exceptions. Sean Orr just got elected to city council in the city, and that was incredible. Sean Orr carries with him a lot of our hopes. But we need people to be more courageous now, not just courageous around harm reduction, but climate change and fighting fascism. If we're going to make it out of this, all of these things can learn from each other, and we're going to need to see that courage a lot more.
I have about 1,000 other questions that I could ask you, but the audience also has a bunch of questions for you, so I'm going to turn it to their questions. Just a reminder that you can use Slido and enter your questions on your smartphone, or just raise your hand the old-fashioned way. What can Vancouverites do to support drug users and stop the overdose crisis?
Join the fight. Join the fight, because that's what saves lives. The reason we were able to push governments, the reason we got Incite, the safe injection place, the reason we got needle distribution here, the reason we got methadone programs expanded here is because drug users and their families and friends organized and pushed. That's how history changes. That's how history moves. That's how we got everything that's good. That's how we got the weekend. That's off work. That's how we got votes for women. Everything comes like this. So join the fight, and you don't have to join my fight, because wherever you are, that's a good place to start organizing. If it's at your library, if you want it to have naloxone or sharps containers, or your community center or whatever, like you know your own lives and the places in it way better than me. This guy called me up from Alberta, and he said, I'm a small businessman in Alberta. What should I do? Where should I go to help out? And I said, stay where you are. Don't let the United Conservative Party there have all the small business people. Organize amongst your contemporaries. And I said, you know what's going on in Calgary better than me. You know what the right campaign is. And he built this organization called Each and Every. And he was involved in the craft brew business. And so he really understood the idea of a safe substance. He said, we have safe beer because it's regulated. He really understood it. He said, we have safe consumption sites on every street corner. They're called bars. So he just took what he knew and applied it. His name is Ewan Thompson, and he writes a great blog called Drug Data Decoded, I think it's called, a Substack. And he's just built this coalition of business partners. So when somebody tries to get a safe injection site shut down and tries to scare and fearmonger amongst the small business people, he can present the other side of that. So wherever you are, it's a good place to start. Physicians on Vancouver Island were upset that harm reduction services were getting rolled back in hospitals because of this surge of right-wing backlash. And so they started setting up overdose prevention sites in tents outside of hospitals illegally. They didn't care. They thought saving lives, that's their Hippocratic oath or whatever, right? And so they just went and did the job that needed to be done. They organized with themselves. To me, they're heroes. One of them even has had to leave her post because she's gotten screwed around and disciplined at work and all this stuff for saving lives. So that kind of gutsy compassion, if you're feeling that, find a place wherever you are, and also your life will be improved by joining the fight. I sometimes I don't ask for help when I need it as often as I should. I've been slow to do that. And when my son was born 8 days ago, he came out and he wasn't breathing. He was blue. and all the people in the hospital took him to the NICU right away, and he was in one of those little plastic tanks for babies, premature babies, but he was 8 pounds. But he wasn't breathing, right? And so they hooked him up with all kind of little wires and everything like that. And I was losing my mind, this poor little thing, and all of my friends and family and people in the movement rallied around us and gave us so much support. And they said, "What do you need?" And I said, I don't even know. I can't imagine. I don't know. But food started showing up and people started doing stuff. And it's because I'm in a community, in a movement. And that used to be just normal. We all used to be like that, right? But we've all fallen apart and fallen away from each other. And saving people's lives and trying to make a better world for ourselves, it brings you closer to each other. It will improve your life. And I don't mind telling you that on Sunday, or late Saturday night, we got a report from the MRI, and my baby was 100% fine, no brain injury, no problem. We took him home on Monday, and he's just like the happiest little guy right now, so.
We only have about 10 minutes left. Laura asks, how did you manage to find an ending for your memoir? Do you feel it summarizes your life or captures a specific portion of it?
Well, that's the thing, right? Is like, you can't just, like when I thought about writing about my life, it's just like, shit, most of my life I've just been on the bus or at work. That's so boring, right? And so, like, I mean, obviously you write the interesting parts, you don't write all the boring parts, because most of our lives are kind of, I was getting groceries, I was doing laundry, so, and also it just doesn't unfold in this nice structure, I didn't just go to the bottom and then come back up and I'm fine. It's just like I struggled with this thing, and sometimes I was doing better and sometimes I was doing worse. And I think that's true for a lot of people, and that struggle for me has also been very collective. Like, I've been an organizer in movements and activism since I was young, and the book really ends on a collective note. It begins in a funeral, in the 90s of my friend Nick, who died, and at the funeral we weren't allowed to talk about the cause of death because everybody was so ashamed. The family was ashamed. We were ashamed. I was ashamed that in my veins at that funeral was the same thing that killed my friend Nick. I was so ashamed. But at the end of the book, 3 elders from Tsleil-Waututh, Sinemuch, and Musqueam gathered, about 50 of us from the community in Oppenheimer Park, and they performed a blanketing ceremony, and we each stood up for somebody who we had lost. I stood up for my friend and comrade, Wade Crawford, and my friend Jeff stood up for his friend Otis, and so forth. So there was 50 of us, and we were blanketing people posthumously. So I was blanketed. It's, a traditional indigenous ceremony of like healing and respect and safety. And it felt so different than that funeral, that I was Nick's funeral. There was no shame. We were all speaking the truth of what happened to us, what happened to the people we loved. And that weight of shame was like lifted off of all of us. And after that ceremony, we were just kind of sitting on the grass there, eating hot dogs. And I just felt like for a minute, all of those people who were lost were with us. And I just thought, one day we're going to win. It won't be like this forever. One day we're going to win. And that's how I ended it.
Did anybody in the room want to ask a question the old-fashioned way? So I'm just going to repeat the question for people at home. Do you feel that the politicians in charge maybe aren't doing more because they need to stay in power? That if they did the things that they think would work, that people are advocating for, that they would be voted out, that there would be so much backlash? Is that about right?
Well, I'm thinking that to help advocate the cause we're talking about, it's better to have those friends and allies in a higher level of power than not. So that's why I think it's a catch-22. Do you know what I mean? Because on the one hand, they speak up when I get elected, but if they stay elected, there's a chance for them to help support your cause more. That's kind of like my thinking.
Yeah, so I'm totally with you, right? Like I vote every election I vote, and I usually I'm usually focusing on the days between the elections and what the organizing I'm going to be doing on all those other days. And there's no question that having a Liberal or NDP government is way better for harm reduction and for people who use drugs than it is to have a right-wing conservative government. Like the evidence is pretty clear on that. But I also think that what we need, we don't actually have a left, not an electoral left, right? I mean, I know that people say the NDP is left, but if you look around the world, our NDP is more like a party of the center. Our Liberal Party, federally is kind of, I think a lot of countries would find it more conservative. The NDP federally needs refreshing. It needs to get back to its roots. If somebody would come up and champion a good working class agenda of massive public housing, building housing, really tackling like the profit taking that happens at the top by the Galen Westons, price fixing bread. Like this is a left-wing agenda that's begging for somebody to get up there and do it and say it straight. But the left is electorally has been so quiet on this stuff that they've left it open for the right, for Pierre Poilievre, and he's not going to champion. The right is not going to champion the working class. That is not how it works. They cosplay around elections, hanging out at a steel mill or something like that, but they are anti-union. Pierre Poilievre was a part of the Harper government, and they had anti-union legislation. So, like, the left has been too quiet, and I believe if the left, instead of being quiet and trying to pass itself off as just in the center, just had a robust, real agenda, not full of jargon, not sounding like they're a bunch of university professors or whatever, but just saying, like, most people are getting screwed, and we're seeing this massive concentration of wealth at the top, and if we don't stop it, we're going to have a society that is so unequal that it'll be, like, dangerously unstable. If somebody would just come out with a real working class agenda like that, people would vote for that shit. People need it. I mean, you just look at Sean Orr ran in the city election, and he just said it like it was, and he got tons of votes, and he's just like, working with COPE, which doesn't have any kind of infrastructure compared to the ABC party of Ken Sim and whatever. We need to be more honest and straight up. And then I finally think if you get elected by just kind of quietly standing for nothing and hoping people won't notice, I don't think that's popular, right? Like a lot of people want something that they can actually believe in. We've become too, I'm repeating myself, but we've become too worried. And I think that kind of honesty would go a long way. So again, vote for me for fentanyl czar. I'll be happy to take up the chair.
On that note, there are a million other questions, but we do have to wrap it up now. There are organizers giving me hand gestures from the shadows. But Garth's book is available over there, and he will be signing them over here, and we're going to be hanging around for a bit, so I'm sure you'd be happy to stay and chat for a little bit. Thank you so much for coming out, and please join me in giving a round of applause to Garth Mullins.
Thank you, Andrea. Andrea Wu has been with us from the beginning. Just your coverage of harm reduction and the whole overdose crisis has been fantastic. Thank you to Jorge and Leslie and the Writers Festival and the Vancouver Public Library. We need libraries, obviously. Thank you all for coming out and spending part of your night, and stay safe and keep six. Thanks.